Good morning, everybody. My name is Jay Goss, and I'll be your host and tour guide during this webinar. I am looking at my clock here, and I think I'll wait another 30 seconds or so just to see if anybody else jumps on the call. Looks like we have a good portion of the people that RSVP'd, but not everybody quite yet. So I will jump back onto this call in about, we'll give it about 30 seconds. Well, hello again, everybody on the call. Thank you for joining. My name is Jay Goss, and I am with Wellcaster, and we are here to talk about mobile training. So as a quick administrative note, feel free to text in some questions anytime during this presentation. I will answer them either on the fly or I'll answer them at the end, depending on kind of how we're flowing through. The chat button is in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. You should be able to click that and you should be able to text me in a question. And if the technology does its thing, we'll see that question. And I or Brian from my office, who's also on the webinar, will get to that question and answer it. And worst case scenario, we'll follow up with you after the webinar and give you a one-on-one answer to your question. So with all that said, I wanted to just say thank you to the Cascadia chapter as well as to Kathleen. And I don't see Kathleen on the call. So Kathleen, if you were on the call, but you are sitting side by side one of the other participants who's on the RSVP list, thank you for making this happen. And if you are not Kathleen, we will certainly circle back with you after the webinar. But let's start. I'm going to try to make this interactive and throughout the best I can in webinar format. And throughout the presentation, I'll put up a few poll questions, which is a good way to get our brains thinking about the mobile device as it relates to the big wide world of training, as well as it helps us get some data on what people like you all over your part of the country and when we do these all over the world are thinking about this. So I'm going to put up this first question. Bear with me here. So the first question we'd like to kind of kick these things off with, and we'll do this 4 times throughout the webinar, is which of these statements characterize how you and your organization are thinking about mobile and the training mix of mobile? We believe in it. We believe in mobile, and we've got some programs going today that are leveraging the mobile phone or the tablet, or we have rolled out a little training in the mobile realm, but we're mostly new to it, or it's on our mind and it's on that proverbial to-do list, but we haven't quite started yet, or somewhat sarcastically, what is mobile training? I'm looking at the responses and thank you for responding. And your chapter is spot on with what we see when we do these all over the country. Vast majority of people have mobile on their training to-do list. If you spin around your chair, it's probably on the dry erase board as something that you're striving to get to this year. Maybe you've done a little bit in the realm of mobile, but we have about a little less than half of you answering it's on our mind and on the to-do list, but we haven't started. And a little less than half of you saying we've rolled out some mobile training, but are mostly new to it. And that's consistent with what we hear. And that's, in fact, what this webinar is all about. So I'm going to end that poll, and I'm going to get us going. So, quick agenda. We're going to spend just a little bit of time on who we are and who the webinar is for. And then the rest of the plan for this webinar is to spend time talking about the various considerations or variables, if you will, around mobile, and then get a little bit more prescriptive and tactical and talk about how one gets started when they as a person or their company as an organization are in fact ready to dip the toe in the mobile waters. So very briefly, a little bit about who we are, which is who I am as a person and who Wellcaster is. So my name is Jay Goss, and I've been a technology pioneer, I suppose, for almost my entire career. And a lot of that has been working in early stage or new to the world technology companies that cover the training and development and in fact organizational development arenas. I spent some time back when we were all getting used to what this crazy thing called the internet was with a company called ExecuServe. It won't sound very provocative today or very pioneering today, but ExecuServe was a company that just as the internet was coming of age was running around working with people on this phone call all over the country, in fact, all over the world. We worked in multiple languages, and we developed online employee opinion surveys, online 360-degree feedback programs, online exit surveys, culture and climate surveys. We were basically a survey monkey, but for the human resources and training and development and organizational development realms. We were very fortunate to count as our customers a lot of the Fortune 500, Global 2000, and big brands all over the country and all over the world. So we worked with Sears and Disney and BASF and General Dynamics and Adidas out by you guys. Had a great time doing this right as we were all starting to get comfortable with using the computer and specifically the internet to replace that paper and pencil process that had preceded it for the 30 or 40 or 50 years that people had been doing these employee surveys and assessments in 360s. And then at the tail end of that, I merged that company with Tracom, which many of you will probably know as the social styles company based in Denver. And ExecuServe continued to live its life, but under the Tracom banner. And we worked with Tracom's clients as basically an embedded business unit inside of Tracom. That's who I am. Just very briefly on who Wellcaster is. So we're a company that was formed about 4 years ago. So in technology years and especially mobile years, we're getting kind of up there in age. 4 years is not a very long time for most companies, but in the mobile world, that puts us at sort of the upper end of the age spectrum. We're a company that does mobile training, and we have a service component and a technology platform. The service side helps organizations in a professional services way transform their training program so that they can take advantage of mobile. And then the technology platform that we have sits there so as to not necessitate that our clients build from scratch the technology they need, but instead can license our platform and not have to spend the time building a proprietary software system from scratch. And our technology works on iPhones and Android devices. Like I said, we were founded 4 years ago. We started the company in New York and we moved it to Los Angeles so that we could be on your coast in 2017. But that's about all we'll say about Wellcaster. The rest of this presentation is really about mobile training, independent of any particular proprietary technology or approach to mobile. It's really about learning how mobile works in the world of training. How does it fit into the training mix? So who this webinar is for, this is a good place for me just to kind of set the stage. So generally it's for the training industry. We think about the training industry and through two lenses. We think about it for the people that are on this phone that are in training roles inside small, medium, and large companies. They work for internal training departments. And this webinar is also for people that work for training companies or vendors that sell their training products or services to small, medium, and large companies. So that's who we think of when we put this webinar together, both internal trainers and training vendors. We think about the nearly 70% of training professionals that have mobile on their to-do list. This is ATD data. And we just more or less confirmed this with our poll that started out this webinar. Folks that are trying to figure out where to start when it comes to mobile. And then lastly, and probably most importantly, we think of this webinar as a good place for you to get information when you're struggling to figure out A, where to start on mobile, but B, and maybe even more importantly, how can mobile not just be part of the training mix, but is there a kill two birds with one stone opportunity here? Can we take all of the good stuff that comes out of instructor-led training and reinforce it with mobile? So a lot of our orientation is not, hey, let's take mobile and replace this instructor-led program. You'll see this theme throughout the presentation. Rather, our approach and our thinking around this, and having done this now for 4 years and had a lot of conversations around it, our approach is squarely, as informed by all of the folks that we've worked with and talked with on that, our approach is instructor-led training continues to have occupy the same place in your training mix that it has today, but mobile has an opportunity to come in and reinforce that learning that's getting done in traditional instructor-led training, improve the learning retention, and most importantly, because of all of that, boost the all-important ROI along the way. So that's who we have in mind for this webinar. Skip here to my next poll question. So, as you can see, the next thing I wanted to get some feedback from the group is, tell me about the extent to which this statement resonates with you. We'd love to develop some follow-on programs to our core training, whether that's instructor-led or e-learning or something else, that ensures the learning sticks. This is what I heard all the time back when I was running these programs for ExecuServe, and this is what we hear now with Wellcaster, is what can we do to extend the shelf life of the training that we're already doing. So I'm going to launch this poll. And again, does this statement resonate with you? We'd love to develop some follow-on programs to our core training that ensures the learning sticks. Absolutely yes, somewhat yes, or no, we have this under control. Give you guys a second to respond. Give myself a second to drink a little water. And so, not a giant surprise, most of you are saying absolutely yes. And that's good, because as I just mentioned, that becomes the icing on the cake with mobile. I think if we put mobile in place in these organizations, not only are you taking advantage of that small handheld device that's in the palm of your employees or a subset of your workforce at all times, or seemingly at all times, but you're able to have this 1-2 punch around doing something that extends that shelf life of the programs you're already running, so that learning sticks, or that learning has a better chance of sticking. So again, just a quick recap on that. 71% of you said absolutely yes, 21% of you said somewhat yes, and one of you has got it completely under control, which is fantastic. So why mobile? Why mobile now? That's really the title of this slide, and that's a good place for us to jump off. Best reason is because we're there. The industry, the country, every pocket of this country, demographically, regionally, these numbers would have been different 3 years ago. You would have seen things under 50% or 60%, and you would have scratched your head, as was the case as we were engaging with companies 3 or 4 years ago. And for all the right reasons, people said, you know what, we're not ready for mobile because a high enough percentage of our workforce doesn't have one of these devices in order to take advantage of it. And we don't want to do a training program that sort of ends up with a haves and have-nots. But now you'll see, well, it's not 100% all over the place. It's getting awfully, awfully close to it. And this is already now outdated data by virtue of being the beginning of 2017. Probably every one of these categories is upticked 1% or 2%. So we're getting about as close to 100% as you're ever going to get. You can't get 100% of people to a meeting room or a conference room to do a workshop, and you can't get 100% of people in front of a computer. So you've got an environment now where we really can think about mobile and not worry about whether or not we're getting to everybody. I'm going to take a quick look to see if we have any questions coming in here. And I'm going to shoot back up here. The other consideration that we think about, or when we think about why mobile and why mobile now, is oftentimes we get involved with people that tell us that, you know, the e-learning works pretty well for my desk-based employees, but they take stock of the fact that not everybody does work behind a desk and does have a laptop or a desktop screen in front of them. So we know we have the teachers and the field sales reps and the nurses and the factory supervisors and just simply people that don't work in jobs where they're in front of a computer at a desk 8 hours a day, in which case the traditional desktop, laptop e-learning doesn't work for those subsets of the workforce. So that's another consideration. And then lastly, everybody's hooked on these phones. The phone is constantly with us. Apparently we even skydive with the phones, as this slide shows. We're addicted to it, and that means that the training industry can harness the very device that we're addicted to. And again, this might not have been true 5 years ago, but we don't go anywhere where we don't see people on their phones all the time. And we'll share some further data about that throughout this presentation. The usage, the addiction, however you want to look at it, is a lot, and it's growing. This chart is basically telling us a couple things. The green is our mobile usage. So our mobile usage in terms of time is going up. And keep in mind, this only takes us through the end of 2015. It's only gone from good to better or bad to worse, depending on how you want to look at it. But not only is the green bar going up, we're spending more time per day on our mobile devices, but as a percentage of our total screen time, the mobile device is getting a greater and greater percentage of our time. So that's another sort of helpful data point to say, okay, now is finally the time to embrace mobile. And I look at this as this date and time being April 28th, 2015. This is the time that the time spent in engagement, minutes, quality time, quantity time. This is the time that we learned that the mobile phone now has passed the desktop laptop. So prior to April 28th, 2015, we were on our phones and our tablets less than we were on our desktops and laptops. After April 28th, 2015, that's when the world shifted. And we're a long way past April 28th, 2015. So again, gives you more confidence to say now is the time to talk to your organizations about now is the time to embrace mobile as it relates to training. We check our phones 150 times per day. We're ready to use this instrument as part of our training delivery. And if none of that sunk in, always makes sense just to let Dilbert do my talking. So we put this in there for good order. So let me bring up our third poll question here. So which statement best resonates with you? Let me launch it. We see mobile as part of our e-learning initiatives that we've already got going, or we see mobile separate from our e-learning initiatives, or we're not quite sure how mobile and e-learning fit together. And I should say, as you're responding to this, we don't have a perfect answer to this question either. But I put it out there because it's something just to start thinking about. Are you going to have mobile live inside everything you've already done? And you might have done it 5 years ago. You might have done it 10 or 15 years ago if you were kind of on the early end of e-learning. Or is it going to live somehow separate and distinct from what you're doing in e-learning? There's no right or wrong answer, but one of the things that you just need to spend, a 5-minute cup of coffee with sometime is just thinking about the relationship between what you're doing in e-learning, assuming you are doing something, and how it's going to relate to mobile. I see that about 70% of you think that mobile should be part of your e-learning initiatives. That's how you think about it. None of you think that they should be separate, and 30% of you are not sure what the relationship between mobile and e-learning should be. So that's interesting. So another facet of the variables around mobile as it relates to training is the attention span. So you look around, you don't need to jump on a webinar to know that attention spans are down in general. That's the times that we live in. We know this, we live this, we see it everywhere we go. But what I can quantify for you is that mobile attention spans are a lot less than even that. The average person is spending about 300 seconds in a given session, or less than 300 seconds in a session on their phone. And that number goes down dramatically if you pull out all of the people that are playing games on their phone. So mobile attention, so in general, people attention span short. In particular, people's attention span on mobile is even shorter. So we need to think about that when we're constructing or designing or blueprinting a training program for mobile. It wouldn't be a very good or realistic expectation that somebody's going to jump on their phone and spend a couple hours engaging in a training program on their handheld device, when in fact the average person's spending less than 300 seconds on their phone in a given session. I'm going to pause here. I'm going to see if I'm just going to take a quick scan of the questions that have come into me to see if I can answer any. So bear with me here.
Hey, Jay. Sonia made a comment.
Okay.
She said that they have quite a few participants who have mobile phones but not smartphones.
Great. Well, let me address that, because that is a good point. So smartphones, the line or the blur between smartphones and non-smartphones, if you will, is a lot different today than it was sort of the beginning of the mobile phone era, where there's a clear distinction between what a phone could do or couldn't do. And it ultimately boils down to whether or not that phone is associated with a data plan. So one of the things to find out is it's not so much important if they've got the sort of the top of the line iPhone or the top of the line Android device, but do they have a phone that has a data plan associated with it? Can they download an app? Can they get on a mobile website? Can they get onto the internet? Insofar as the answer to that is no, and that's less and less the case now, but it is out there in the world. Again, none of my percentages were all the way at 100% when we talked about that. You've got to take that into consideration. And if you have, we did a project, gosh, this goes back several years. I did a project with a farming company. And I thought, oh my gosh, we're going to be in deep trouble. Turns out these people had, the people that were working in sort of rural parts of America, literally on tractors, had better phones than the city slickers did in the big cities. So we were pleasantly surprised. But it's something you need to look at. And another question that I see that's coming up tied to this is a question about data usage. Yes, it's something you need to be concerned about. However, I will say this, going back to the very theme of the slide that we're on now, the attention span is such that if you listen to the advice that Wellcaster would give you, you're not going to let them be on their phone consuming or going through a training experience for more than a few minutes at a time. So no matter how rich that content is, no matter how data heavy it is, it's not going to have really any appreciable impact on the employee's data plan, whether they're on a small, medium, large, or unlimited data plan. So that it's a little bit of a fringe benefit of this attention span point. That said, if you constructed a program that was going to have them in front of their phone for 2 or 3 hours, then all of a sudden the opposite is true, and you do have to be concerned about the data usage. But our point of view is you're not going to use the mobile device to give them long doses of training, and we're going to spend even more time on that as I kind of move through this webinar. But thanks for that, Brian. And thank you for that question. So I'm going to move through now, talk a little bit about video. So video is important as it relates to mobile because the use of video on the mobile phone has gone from something we almost never did, even when these smartphones first came out, consuming video, whether it was a YouTube video or something that was more professional or practical or educational. It's just something we didn't do a lot of. The video quality was bad. We had the buffering and the stuttering, and it frustrated us more than it didn't. But that's changed a lot. And video consumption on mobile devices has just gone up and up and up and up and up. When you combine that, the fact that we now have good quality mobile video with the fact that you simply learn more efficiently when you're taking in video compared to text, it really becomes the medium you have to think about. We're big advocates when we talk to people about doing a lot in video, doing it in short doses, short bite-sized units of content, but staying video-centric. A minute of video is sort of been confirmed to be worth about 1.8 million words of text. So again, in the interest of efficiency, we're going to communicate this by video. And this wouldn't have been an economically viable statement for me to have made a decade ago. If we were on this webinar 10 years ago, I could have said the same thing. People prefer video, and video is a more efficient form of communication. But all of your companies would have moaned and groaned that the cost of producing video was just too expensive. It used to be, when we looked at video production, we thought about it in terms of tens of thousands of dollars per minute of video produced. That's a couple orders of magnitude less now. Most people are producing their video content for hundreds of dollars per minute of video content produced. And that's just because it's just so much easier to create good quality video without hiring, a Hollywood film crew or a crew in New York to produce your video for you, which would have been, one of your only options 10 years ago. So everything kind of converges to making video one of the central parts of your mobile strategy. And the other part of this is, you've got to keep in mind that when we're talking about e-learning and we're talking about the desktop and the laptop, I've got a nice big full-size keyboard there. When it comes to the mobile phone or the tablet, we're talking about a much smaller keyboard. So while you can take advantage of the fact that the wire goes both ways and you can push content to the learner, to the employee, and they can in fact send content back to you or information back to you, because it is a two-way wire, you need to think about it carefully, because you can't expect a lot of information to come back from the employee to you in terms of a feedback loop if they're having to thumb keystroke on a small keyboard on their mobile device. So somewhat of an obvious statement to make, but we remind people that when it comes to your mobile training program, if you do in fact want to capture a fairly substantive amount of information coming from the learner back to you in terms of how they're interacting with the content, it's perfectly okay to have the content consumed by them on their mobile device and then have them jump at the end of the program or the middle of the program onto a desktop or laptop and give you the information that you're looking for in a desktop laptop way going in the other direction. That you're going to keep your employees happy versus having to write long responses, especially if they're open-ended comments back to you on their small mobile keyboards. And then lastly here, we talk about, as a reminder, that everything you're going to do in mobile is digital. So all of that data is going to be there, just like with e-learning. Every click, if you want to think of them as clicks, every click that your employee workforce is making on their mobile device, if set up properly, you're going to be able to capture. So all of the data that you've grown accustomed to getting in an e-learning way, you ought to be able to get in a mobile learning way. It's the same premise. The dashboard might look a little different. You might be using a different system entirely, but fundamentally, you're going to be able to find out, did they click on this? Did they do that? Did they watch the video? Did they watch the video all the way to the end? Whatever it is, the metrics that you're looking for, you ought to be able to get in a mobile environment, just as you've grown accustomed to in your e-learning environment. So now I'll jump into our last poll question here. And the last poll question is anticipating something that we're going to talk about here in a minute, which is spaced learning. So which statement best characterizes your point of view or your company's point of view around the paradigm of spaced learning? We're big believers in spaced learning and are incorporating it into our training already, or we've started to explore the spaced learning concept, but haven't done a ton with it, or spaced what? And it looks like I'm getting not quite a third, but we usually get a mixed bag of reaction to this. We're going to talk about spaced learning, but we're not throwing it in there randomly into this webinar. We think that the prongs of spaced learning and what you're typically trying to achieve with a mobile training program really fit nicely together, all because of that attention span concept that we talked about earlier. So the results of that poll, get my computer back up. The results of the poll were a little less than 20% of you are big believers in spaced learning. Half of you have started to explore the spaced learning paradigm, and a third of you don't know what spaced learning is, which is great. We're about to cover that. I'm just going to take a quick look to see if we have any questions. I'm scanning our questions to see. And Brian, if you spotted any, please jump in and let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to do another scan at the end of the webinar and see if we can hit any of those at the end. So spaced learning is really a concept that is predicated, the way I think about it is it's predicated on you'll remember more and you'll forget less if you're absorbing that information over a longer period of time in shorter doses. I can relate to this whether I'm putting on my ATD hat or I'm thinking about this in terms of having 2 kids at home and how they learn their multiplication tables. The basic premise resonates with me, and it's empirically backed up by lots and lots and lots of studies. If we want our employees to remember what they're learning, forget less, have it stick around in their heads and manifest itself in their professional behavior for a longer period of time, spacing out this content is the way to go. If you think about that in relationship to the attention span that we talked about on the mobile phone, you really have a perfect marriage. And Brian, if you could mute your phone, I can hear the background a little bit on your phone. So that's what we're talking about here when we think about spaced learning. I tell people all the time, binging is great for TV, but if you're looking for an ROI, and if you remember the very beginning of the webinar, we talked about how mobile can take what's going on in your instructor-led workshops, the traditional training that's been going on for 100 years, and it can really extend the life of that. We see it all the time. We see a workshop, we could have all of our employees in an instructor-led workshop that goes on for 30 or 40 hours one week. At the end of that workshop, they walk up, they get their certificate. It says they completed the program. But most trainers I talked to over the last 4 years will tell me one thing. They're worried about as soon as the training's over, does it stick? Does that employee start to change their professional behavior? If they do, great. If they don't, the company got no ROI out of those training dollars it just spent. And so we see that same scenario working beautifully with a mobile training program. They've gone through a 30 or 40 hour workshop or a 3 or 4 hour workshop. They can still get their certificate at the end of the workshop, but at the end, let's put something on their phone that allows them to get a little bit of content that cements and reinforces what they learned in the workshop, delivered to their phone every day for a couple extra weeks or a couple extra months or several months. The duration of the program, those are just the devils in the details. The point is we can now extend that learning that they got in the instructor-led program, which is probably the best way for them to have learned it in the first place. We can extend that by giving it to them on their phone. We talk about 90 seconds to 5 minutes per day, going back to that attention span point, is a good min-max for what you should be thinking about. So hit the employee with some additional information about what they just learned about in the instructor-led program, and hit them for 90 seconds or up to about 5 minutes. But don't go much longer than that, because again, they're on their mobile device. We talk to people about the ability to prevent that employee from fast forwarding through content. So if it's a 14-day program that they experience on their mobile phone after an employee-led workshop, let's not let them get to day 5 when they're only on day 4. Let's give them a proverbial DVD player that has a rewind button, but it doesn't have a fast forward button. Because again, if you subscribe to this spaced learning concept, you don't want them to go through all 14 days in one sitting. You want them to go through all 14 days in 14 days. And all of this, of course, just extends that learning journey by weeks or months. So this is the first piece, the first concept that we wanted to talk about as and what we've really done in this webinar at this point is shifted gears to now talking a little bit more prescriptively about how to start a program. Up until this slide, I was talking to you about the stats and facts, kind of the state of the mobile industry, and giving you as much information as I could think to give you the confidence to say, okay, now is the time to dip my toe in the mobile waters. Starting here, I want to really spend a little bit of time just giving you some concrete ideas that answer the question, okay, how do I get started? So the first one to think about is getting started as a defining the relationship between spaced learning and your mobile training concept. The other things to think about here are that you want to give, and this relates to even some of the earlier questions, you want to give your employees an opportunity to dictate when during the course of the day they want to digest the mobile training that they're receiving from the company. In an instructor-led program, you don't have that luxury. Everybody's got to show up at 11 o'clock or at 2:30 in the afternoon or whenever the workshop starts. There has to be a start time. There has to be an end time. But in this case, everybody can have their own customized program when it comes to when. So somebody might have time or the inclination to go through their mobile training in the morning. Other people might want to do it just after their lunch hour. An executive might want to do it over a glass of wine at the end of their day after a dinner meeting. Point being is you've got a device that doesn't care when the content is delivered to the employee. So let the employee customize when they would most appreciate receiving that information. A lot of platforms, Wellcaster is one of those platforms, allow the employee to dictate when during the course of their day they want to take in the training information. The third point here is content is still king. So all of the attention to detail that you have when you put together an instructor-led workshop or an e-learning program, you focus on the content. You don't cut corners, and you want to think the same way when it comes to mobile. One thing is for sure, and we had some experiences like this when we first started out as a company 4 years ago. One thing was for sure, when it comes to mediocre content, especially if it's going to be video, you're going to turn off your the employee population that's consuming that content. So take the time to make sure that the content, in particular if it's video, is good quality. Again, from that one statistic, it doesn't cost a lot of money to produce good quality video today. It would have 10 years ago. That's not the case today. So make sure that the video is quality. Make sure that it engages the audience. And when you think about who's going to be on video, quite often it's a subject matter expert that you're sort of bottling up in video and then presenting to the learners via their mobile phone. Make sure that subject matter expert is dynamic. Make sure that they're doing a good job on camera. They have charisma. Some people translate very well when they're on camera. Other people don't. And again, lessons learned for my company, Wellcaster. We very much learned the hard way that we need to spend the time to make sure that the person that's going to be on video is got the energy and they're coming across well to the audience that they're getting in front of. Number 4, we talked about before, but I'll just mention it again here. Be comfortable reverting out of mobile and into sort of the desktop laptop when you want to do reverse communication. If you want your employees that just went through a mobile training program if you want to give them an assessment or you want to get any feedback from them back to you, in essence, reversing the communication that's going from point A to point B in the wire and going from point B to point A, let that be done on a desktop or laptop. The mobile keyboard's tiny, and there's no rule that says what you start out doing in mobile has to be completely mobile. If you want to do a lengthy survey or an assessment or something where they're recording information and sending it back to you, have that experience be done on a desktop or laptop. Number 5, think about the data tracking. Like we talked about on the earlier slide, you're going to have all the data. If you were in your role pre-e-learning and then learned sort of the hard way about getting a handle on data that can be collected during a training engagement and how wonderful that is in an e-learning world once you got the hang of it, the same thing's going to happen with mobile training. So think about that. What do you want to capture on an employee by employee basis? What do you want to capture for the finance department versus the marketing department, or one region of the country versus another region of the country? You're going to have all that data. You're going to be able to use that data as strategically as you've grown accustomed to when you do your e-learning. And then number 6, just a couple technical points. And it relates to the question that came up earlier about smartphones versus non-smartphones. Even if you have an audience that's all smartphones, and even if everybody you sit around on your floor of the building seems to have an iPhone, trust me or trust the data, not everybody has an iPhone, or everybody doesn't have an Android device for that matter. So if you do something that is app-centric, which is, there's a lot of technical advantages to that. You end up taking advantage of a technical or a technology paradigm that's very user-friendly. We all have several apps on our phones. Bear in mind that this is not a place to say, oh, if it works for the iPhone people, I'll be just fine. It needs to work for the Android people and the iPhone people. Almost certainly your company has a good mix of people that have the iOS devices, phone and tablet, and people that have the Android devices. So you just, the two little characters sitting there on the bench are the Apple for the iPhone and the Android robot for Android. Any other consideration is when it comes to mobile, there is a technical piece to this. So you have to think about whether or not you want to build from scratch the technology to deliver the mobile content that you want to get to your employees, and do that through a technology undertaking, or whether or not you want to find somebody that has that technology, they've already built it, and it's ready to go for you. It's kind of the idea of, do you want to use a YouTube as a video player, or do you want to build your own video player? And back at the beginning of the internet, people built their own video players, and then they realized, wait a second, don't need to be doing that. YouTube's got a great little video player. I'll just go ahead and leverage what they already have. Wellcaster is a perfect example of that. Our platform is used by most of our clients because there's no sense in them reinventing that wheel. But you certainly give that some consideration. And those are my sort of the last of the points I wanted to make around the more prescriptive part of this. Again, I've tried to keep this very high level so that everybody had an opportunity to think about this more generally within your organizations. I am absolutely willing to do any kind of one-on-one calls with any of you where we can do a deeper dive into what's going on inside your organization, what type of an organization it is, what kind of training you do internally, what kind of training do you bring vendors in for, and then I'm able to go and do a much more comprehensive or thorough job giving you some advice and guidance around how to go dip a toe. But this is what we wanted to cover here. And while everybody is still on the phone, if people are not dying to jump off, I'm just going to take a quick glance at any questions to see if there's anything that I think would be good for the group. And Brian, feel free to jump in if you see anything that is great for us to mention out to everybody.
Okay. Ken Thompson asked, had a question about capturing return audio via the device instead of text. He mentioned that's what he's been using with his employee workshops.
Ken, that's a very good question, and for sure, more and more people are doing that. I mean, you see people. A few years ago, you rarely saw somebody verbally reciting a text message to the person they were going to send it to. They would be, thumb stroking it in. More and more employees are getting comfortable with that. There's two ways to think about that. There's the audio getting returned to you in audio, and then there's the audio being converted into text to the people that want the information. Little bit of ins and outs related to those two scenarios. But in general, people are doing that more and more. And it's a perfect example of, and I should have mentioned this earlier, if you think about our relationship with our desktop or laptop, the desktop or laptop really, although technically it has become a more powerful machine over the last 10 years, we're fundamentally using the desktop laptop for about the same things we were 10 years ago. And that is entirely not true with a mobile phone. Not only has the mobile phone become technologically more powerful, we simply use it for more and more things, especially as it relates to the desktop or laptop today than we did before. And this is a perfect example of people are using the audio capabilities to return audio in the other direction, as an audio file or converted to text. So I think it's a really good point.
Sonia Thomas, she made a comment regarding people without smartphones. She states about 30% of them are low income and do not have a data plan, and 30% do not know how to use it. How would you address that problem?
Well, you have to look at it. There's no getting around that. My metrics up there are national averages, and any given company could over-index or under-index on any of those fronts: age demographics, socioeconomic demographics, rural versus urban dwellers, even parts of country. There's a lot to that, but by and large, there's no getting around. If you have a unique employee population that does not have access to smartphones, then I would acknowledge that all bets are off. You don't want to roll this out. We talked to a hospital one time, and the hospital had a large percent. This was a couple years ago, so it probably wouldn't be as acute today. Had a large number of nurses that at the time didn't have a smartphone device on them. That same hospital today, things have changed a lot because the nurse is using the phone for a variety of professional purposes in the course of his or her shift. But 2 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case, and that sort of took mobile out of the equation for that particular employer, meaning a hospital. So you do have to do your homework on that and find out the extent to which your employee population has this all-important smartphone. If they don't, or if a high enough percentage of them don't, then you either need to think about an e-learning mobile hybrid, or you need to hold your breath for another 6 months or another year until that portion of the population has embraced the mobile phone. And what a lot of employers are doing, and I don't know if this is the case here, is more and more employers want their employees to have phones. So cell phones are being subsidized by the employer. So that's something else. That's something also that will start to get wrestled with across all industries in the coming years, because the mobile device is just simply something that some people need. Forget about training; they will just need it to do their day in, day out job for a variety of white collar and blue collar jobs. So I'm scanning this, and there's I'm scanning the questions and comments that came up, and there's a number of very good ones here. Not easily answered in a succinct way. So for any of you people that gave me questions or comments, I will certainly respond back to you in an email. And if you guys want to set up a phone call, I'm happy to do that, where we can do a deeper dive on your questions and comments. But I also want to make sure that I get you guys all off this call, off the webinar in time to get back to your day in, day out work, especially if you're joining us from work. But again, my email address and my direct line are here on this slide. If you want to follow up with me at all to talk about this webinar or to talk about maybe some things that didn't come up in the webinar, I'm absolutely happy to do it. That's why we put on these webinars, and we try to do these for as many of the ATD chapters as will have us, because we're big believers, as that first poll question came up. We're just big believers that now is the time that most of you are poised to start thinking about the wonderful world of mobile training. So I will wrap it up here. I will thank you all again. And again, thank you to Kathleen, who is our point person at the Cascadia ATD chapter, for helping us get this set up. And I'll wish you guys all the luck in the world as you go dip a toe into the mobile waters. Thank you very much. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.